Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session Decarbonisation Futures One Goal Many Journeys will now begin. Channel 1 is for English, Channel 2 is for French, Channel 3 is for Arabic, and Channel 4 is for Spanish. And now, please welcome to the stage our moderator for this session, CEO Uruwaka Mimo, CEO of Uruwaka Mimo Coaching and Consulting.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be your moderator for this conversation on decarbonisation futures, one goal, many futures. We have brilliant minds to explore these issues with. I'll introduce them, starting with Sergio Alcocer, the former president of the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations. We have Michel Derdeve, President, Confrontations Europe. Thank you. No, please be seated. We have Andres Kramer, Special Advisor, Board of Directors, Oceano Azul Foundation. And last but not least, we've got Edward Shikunla, Governor of the Central Bank of Malta. Gentlemen, welcome. Before we get started, there's a video to frame our conversation.
Yet their journeys are shaped by distinct constraints and choices. While the destination is common, structural differences, economic volatility, energy security, governance capacity, and technology creates multi-speed transition across regions. These varied approaches are reshaping the international climate landscape, influencing global coordination, cross-border energy systems, and the credibility of long-term climate commitments. To maintain progress, robust institutional mechanisms are critical, especially in contexts of political uncertainty, unequal finance access, and exposure to climate shocks. How can accountability and climate credibility be maintained when countries pursue different transition speeds and policy models? What forms of regional and cross-border cooperation can accommodate national sovereignty while supporting shared decarbonization goals? In context of crisis or institutional stress, what tools can safeguard climate finance, investment flows, and long-term implementation?
So that's the framing of the conversation. Please have your phones ready because I have a question for you. This conversation, as we know, comes after COP30 in Brazil, which offered both breakthroughs and constraints. Countries agreed to operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund, new adaptation indicators, and a major finance goal, the VII Action Mechanism, to mobilize $1.3 trillion annually by 2035. We also saw the emergence of a voluntary fossil transition roadmap agenda and the global Mutirao cooperative agenda. So my question to you, which you're already answering, is what is the biggest barrier to a coherent multi-speed global transition? And what we see, the T word. Finances. I mean, the T word is taking up a lot of headspace in this Atlantic dialogues, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So look, please keep that up because, gentlemen, and this is my first question to you is, given everything that we are experiencing as a community, how do countries maintain credibility in an environment which since yesterday we've been hearing is volatile, chaotic, disruptive, turned upside down by the T word? And I'll start with you, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you, Uduak, and thanks for being invited to this panel. It's becoming a regular feature every year. It's a highlight of my annual calendar. Today is a very important day. Today is the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. It was gavelled on the 12th of December 10 years ago. And I think it is worth remembering that as a consequence of the Paris Agreement and the commitments that were made in Paris by governments and by corporations, we actually have increased investment in renewable energy. The rollout of renewable energy has accelerated, and we have slowed the rate of global overheating. It's still overheating, it's still accelerating, but the speed of acceleration has gone down. So we're beginning to break the trend. And you summarized the outcomes of Berlin earlier this year. Very important conference. But what you didn't say is just as important. It was the world showing that multilateralism works even without the United States. It's a very important message to come out of that. Huge support from around the world, in spite of the American government not being present. At the same time, actually, the participation of American businesses increased from 50 of the Fortune 100 companies being present the year earlier in Baku. This time in Berlin, it was 60. So this shows commitment from the corporate world, and I think this is important. The Paris Agreement does set this mechanism in place whereby countries every 5 years have to declare their national determined contributions, and then they have to report on them, and then there can be all sorts of governmental bodies, intergovernmental bodies, or researchers pouring through them and finding out what works, what doesn't work. If they fall behind on their own commitments, there will be assistance in trying to improve their policies. But in actual fact, there is no sanctions. So this is a voluntary system. But it doesn't address only governments, central governments, regional governments, municipal governments. They can all do that. It also allows corporations to buy into that. And I hope that it's along the value chains. It is in dialogue with their shareholders, with investors, with the financial institutions. There is so much infrastructure already into the monitoring of emissions, into the verification of the emissions, into the reporting, standardized reporting, into the aggregation by sector, by country, by value chain. There is a lot of infrastructure in the corporate reporting system already that then financial institutions, bank insurances, and central banks rely on in order to assess the risk of climate overheating and all the consequences for business, the risk of that to the financial infrastructure, to the stability of our economies.
Andreas, thank you for that comprehensive overview. And since you talked about the Paris Agreement 2015, and the Paris Agreement, as we know, pretty much established our intentions in a world that is heating. And so, Michelle, I come to you then for your understanding of how far we've come from COP15 to COP30, which, as we know, was the global stock-taking of how we've done.
Merci beaucoup de me donner la parole. Moi, je rejoindrai tout à fait ce qui a été dit à l'instant. Ce qui marque la différence entre la COP de Paris, il y a 10 ans, jour pour jour, et la COP 30, c'est ce qu'on pourrait qualifier en français de désalignement des planètes. Il y avait à Paris une convergence entre les politiques, les industriels, les ONG, la société civile, autour de l'idée qu'il y avait une urgence climatique. L'urgence climatique, depuis 10 ans, elle s'est matérialisée. Au Maroc, le stress hydrique. En France, les tempêtes de plus en plus fréquentes qui affectent
more and more frequent water scarcity, hurricanes throughout the world, floods, flash floods, lots of events like that. And in spite of that observation, the Berlin COP did not converge and the objectives are not met. In Paris, we intended to cut emissions with reference to the 1990 potential reduction of 2 degrees. And now the climate experts are telling us that we are going to go above 3 to 4 degrees. It means that we are going to go over the objectives that we set to ourselves in Paris. But the good news is that the good old fossil industries won the game. Is it a good news? No, I don't think. They're, keeping on searching for fossil fuels underground to keep on this system and to let the industries and the societies to keep on going. But if we do not really establish a carbon market, as soon as we do not establish a face value of the carbon credits, there's nothing that will really work. So each country reasons in function of their own interests nowadays. How can they optimize their economic development? And I'd like to build on what's been said on the renewables development. We do not have sufficient investments on renewables so far. There's a word that we haven't mentioned very much so far. It's nuclear. It's not a taboo to talk about nuclear energy. Wherever countries throughout the world want to use energy that is of nuclear source, there are plenty of different nuclear power plants, and in some African countries they could be a possibility as a complement to renewables. We could also embrace these kinds of energies, but we have to very quickly get out of fossil fuels, gas, oil, coal, except that we have huge pressures of large economies, Russia, the United States, China, keeping on building charcoal plants, and they are no longer harmonized and articulated around a common vision. This is my answer to your question. There is a discrepancy, and we are not very optimistic for the future, unfortunately.
What grade would you give us as a global community in terms of our performance over the last 10 years?
Comment analyser la performance depuis 10 ans?
How can I analyze your performance over a period of a decade? I think there are some actions that have been launched in the past decade. They were quite performing. The carbon market in Europe developed. It's going to bring 40 billion euros over the European area and will lead to a redistribution of renewable energies in a number of actions to master the way we are going to use power. We have some concrete actions, but what marks the period is the disarticulation of the global dream and the capacity to protect a heating planet. So somehow this was a piece of information that is rather pessimistic than optimistic for the years to come.
To you, because it's always all about the money, isn't it? What concrete financial or regulatory innovations do you think would be most likely to ensure that COP30's financial architecture becomes deployable capital for countries moving at different speeds and dealing with different conditions?
Well, talking of the EU, the area, the region I know best, it's the bottom line. I mean, it's the bottleneck, because, you know, I mean, there's a lot of talk and goodwill, and I cannot downplay the progress we've had so far. But now comes the difficult things when other issues come in: war, defense. You know, these are big budgetary issues which will, you know, interfere with our, you know, resolute way of going along this climate change. So, I mean, I've seen it. I mean, in France, how many times they've introduced carbon taxes and they had to reverse them. I mean, now we look at the electric cars. Again, in some countries, they want to delay switching from combustion, you know, to electric. So you can see these signs. It gets more difficult as we go along, and it's all about money, you know, after all, both for the consumer to make those sacrifices, because we have to make lifetime changes and way we live and so on. And when it matters, then we start getting hiccups. So it's not a question of not having the budget, but you know, whether it's the industry, whether it's the household, and the governments, you know, because governments are foreseeing bigger and bigger debts because of post-COVID expenditures, on top of now the defense agenda. So climate will get less and less attention, which is much needed. So I mean, when you're cutting aid to the third world countries, I mean, how you've gone that far. So you start cutting with the budgets, and I am afraid climate will, all the programs there would tend to suffer. But I'm not that pessimistic. I'm just saying that reality is what it is. It will be a slower move towards whatever governments have planned.
Your experiences with central banks, talk to us about the role of central banks in addressing climate matters, particularly risk.
Well, we're talking of an institution which was not created for the environment, didn't feature at all, and it was not meant to be. I mean, it has a very, first of all, you're referring to the ECB, which has 20 and soon 21 national central banks together as one family. The euro system has a very particular mandate: price stability and financial stability. And it's inherited this culture from the Bundesbank, with very rigid regulations and very serious. And
Andres is very pleased with
and
that.
yes, if you vary, you'll be taken to court, no less. So there are lawyers and so on. So but it took a courage from a lady, Christine Lagarde, who 5 years ago wanted to introduce addressing environmental and climate change matters, which I will then explain later on, hopefully, another round. But the justification for a central bank whose mandate is price stability and not the environment to address environmental matters is justified by the fact that if you look at price stability, or financial stability, or monetary policy, they will be affected by climate change, either by the climate change itself, by the floods, by the weather, by the damage to assets and so on, and also by the transition itself. In other words, governments will impose taxes, subsidies, you name it, and that would in turn devalue certain assets, change them. So it will affect both the financial stability, and also prices. I mean, take food scarcity or droughts. They will raise prices. So the inflation dynamics would change. But worse, it would be the monetary policy, where we had tools with the interest rates working in such a manner, and this will interfere. They distort monetary policy. So we are justified into addressing, we have to be careful how, because we are, we've got all eyes on the central bank not to go too much in that direction. But on the other hand, we have the NGOs making protests behind our doors in the towers in Frankfurt because we're not doing enough. So they would want us to be like an environmental institution, which we are not. So we're not mandated to, for climate or environmental policy at all. We're doing as much as we can, and I will explain how later on.
Sergio, I'll come to you, because typically when we have these sorts of conversations, and I think Edward introduced that, the answer is typically electrification. Speak to us about Mexico's own experience with adaptation to climate.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the Policy Center for New South for the invitation to be here. And before I answer the question, I think it's important to sort of indicate that this is an issue that is a multi-stakeholder kind of issue. We have talked about governments, NGOs, companies, the banking sector, but also the academics, which play a significant role in order to improve the technology. And we are talking about electrification, digitalization, but we should not lose sight that in order to decarbonize the economy, we should find cost-effective solutions. This is a business proposition. And in that regard, the experience in Mexico has been quite mixed and has depended a lot of ideology from the government, and that's where things may work or may not work. Because in order to deploy the decarbonized technologies or more efficient technologies or renewables, you need to take into account that this is a technical solution that has to be implemented, regardless of your ideology. But if you want to put ideology first, then it will not work. The deployment of these technologies may be hindered and may not work. And the main issue has been, at least in Mexico, on how you define sovereignty in terms of the energy sector. If you want, if you would define sovereignty to have access to cheap energy, to have affordable energy, reliable energy, and to have enough energy that will support your activities, that's one thing. But if you want to control all this technology and all these energies being controlled by the state, then the model is quite different. And so we have two different models in the past years. In some like 20 years or so, we started with the first model, in which you have kind of an open market type of model. And so the deployment of renewable energies was quite significant in terms of solar, wind, and in terms of hydroelectric plants. We have only one nuclear plant. But now we're living on the second model, in which the state wants to control the sovereignty and the deployment of energy. And in that regard, you need to have resources, you need to have funds. And typically governments do not have enough funding to actually have a large-scale deployment, unless you invite the private sector. But if your ideology doesn't match inviting the private sector with public partnerships, then the deployment would be limited. That's where we are right now. And so we are facing a dilemma on how to actually advance in a clean energy sector with only the government being supporting this. And this will be a very slow process unless we invite the private sector. That's one of the challenges that we face.
But you're also deploying geothermal energy.
Yes.
Along with artificial intelligence.
Well, there is a chance to use the geothermal sources that we have. Mexico used to be the number one producer of geothermal energy many years ago. But you need to continue investing into this. Now Indonesia, Philippines, the US have large reservoirs and large plants based on geothermal energy. And the use of artificial intelligence would be very beneficial in order to find out where the reservoirs would be best located. And there have been very interesting advances on how to actually perforate the rock. Typically, what we were typically used to think of is to have a drill bit that will destroy the rock, eventually making a hole, reaching the reservoir, reaching the mantle, well, not the mantle, but the crust of the earth, in which you have hot rock, enough heat in order to produce steam when you add water. Now there are new technologies in which you use high frequency waves and that actually break the rock. You don't need to drill the rock. And there have been very interesting results using these technologies that will actually make geothermal energy through enhanced systems to be a very promising energy. And you don't need to have a reservoir of geothermal sources. You need to have only water available. And that will be a very interesting technology, not only for Mexico, but throughout the world. So that's why academics and technology and research become so significant.
Okay, I'll come to you in the audience for your questions shortly. Professor Lopez, I hope you're here somewhere, because as you can see, Africa is not reflected on this panel. Andreas, Sergio gave us two conceptualizations of sovereignty. You have an interesting take on sovereignty, particularly in the world that we find ourselves in. From where you sit, how does sovereignty play into this conversation?
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize that global overheating is a global phenomenon. It affects us all. Humanity, all of humanity, is in this together. Either we solve this problem together, or civilization as we know it will die. In that context, sovereignty, if it is separation of units of control according to nation states, just isn't helpful. And I think we should recognize that. I grew up in Germany, which is a country where sovereignty is scaled. We have a local level, we have a regional level, we have a national level, now we have a European level above that, and we have the global level. sovereignty is a malleable construct in that context. But I also want to say something else, and that is if we look at Russia's renewed attack on Ukraine in 2022, what Russia did beforehand in the run-up was to make sure that they ran down the gas storage in Germany, which they controlled at the time, and they withdrew all the rail trucks, the tanker trucks that could be used in order to transport oil in Europe. They just pulled them into the Russian sector, which they can through the European railway clearance system, and they were gone. They were not available for us. They prepared it. But in Germany, we then realized what was going on, and we started the process of securing as many tanker trucks as we could and running down, decreasing our gas consumption as quickly as we could in order to reduce our vulnerability to this gas shock that was induced by Putin. Had that happened without Germany building out its renewable industry beforehand, or investing in the solar power and the wind power, but also into energy efficiency, we would have lost. The German economy would have tanked completely. It didn't, because we made that investment into renewable energy where we harvest environmental flows, the sun, the wind, the water that flows, the plants that grow. We are harvesting the energy flows on our territory with capital deployed on our territory, with a workforce that works on our territory and pays taxes on our territory. What can be more reinforcing your own national resilience and sovereignty than having renewable energies? That is a lesson that we've learned only 3 years ago, at the beginning of 2022, and it's a lesson that we won't forget. That is my take on the link between sort of the geopolitics of renewable energy, the expansion of it, the autonomy, the self-supply component within it, and therefore security, resilience, and sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphones, questions? Microphone, okay. To the lady in the front. And we'll take 3. Please be brief. Introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thank you so much. My name is Derla Cardozo. I'm from CNN Brazil. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the results of COP30 that just finished in Brazil. Your evaluations is that did we get what we needed for regarding decarbonization?
Okay, another question, although I think we already addressed that question. At the back.
Thank you. My name is Samba Thiam. I'm Ambassador at Large for Economic Affairs. I have a very specific question.
From which country?
Mauritania.
Thank you.
How do you see the future of green hydrogen project? The reason why I'm asking, in a country like Mauritania, we have now on the table 3 major projects totaling close to 80 billion in US dollar financing. Do you think first is viable in terms of financing, and how do you see the sector evolving, because it has been slowed down by, I don't want to say the word, but some declaration. Exactly.
Yeah. Right. Any questions from this side? Yes. Tembiso. There you go.
Thanks very much. It's a question to Andreas. Last year you gave a very interesting warning. It was some sort of a warning for some of us who are going through the energy transition. You talked about the moribund coal-fired stations that have reached their term of usage, and African countries are forced to pay a market-related price for these almost moribund facilities. In other words, we're being ripped off because they've reached their term of usage, but because of these impositions for us to transition, we are at the moment paying a market-related price for power stations that are about to collapse. Now, what advice will you give to African countries to avoid this trapping, which is, in all appearances, corrupt?
Thank you. There's a question right here at the front. Here. Thank you.
Marcus Freitas from the Policy Center. My question would be this. There was a study that I recently saw that the greatest beneficiary of the green economy would be China because of all the production of all the materials, solar panels and all this, and China would be the greatest beneficiary, and that's one of the reasons why you see President Trump going back into fossil fuels, so that delays that advantage of China in that sense. But my question is this. Do we see a double standard when it comes to the environment and the economy? Because at the same time that for a long time we're expecting electric vehicles to become a reality, then we see all countries imposing high tariffs and saying that the Chinese subsidize and all that. So how are we going to change that double standard so that a developing country really sees that the countries that are pushing the agenda really walk the talk?
Okay, thank you. We'll respond to this round of questions and then come to you for more. Thank you. And Michelle, I'll start with you, just so we can tie up the COP30 analysis. Go ahead.
Je reviendrai peut-être juste sur un point qui a été évoqué.
I'd like to get back to a point that was mentioned in the debate about the sovereignty. If tomorrow we want to tackle climate change or global warming, we are to make sure that not everybody is trying to do its own climate policy within their own borders. There's the whole topic of interconnection, of the overlapping of networks. Ana Palacio is there. Oyola thought the European market of energy a long time ago as a market where solidarity and mutual aid would work between the different countries. This very notion of solidarity and exchanges between these different countries is a centric notion. Morocco has interconnection projects with an electrical grid with a series of states. Unfortunately, the project with the UK is now hindered, but we are to support these projects. And another point was mentioned yesterday here is that throughout the energy networks, there can be some state coalitions, a Maghrebi market of power, for example, convergence points and common interests, gathering politicians to discuss the same subjects around the same table. We've mentioned green hydrogen. It's a central topic. Europe is planning to produce 10 million tons of hydrogen by 2030. In the meantime, the very same EU Commission says that they will buy 10 million tons outside Europe. So we can see that Morocco is extremely well positioned as a hub between Africa with the hydrogen resources of Africa and Europe. So we should encourage all this and not stay in the notion that some countries want to, fold back into a sort of a closed strategy in terms of climate, but we have to think about strategy exchanges and mutual aid between the different stakeholders.
An answer to a question that was asked in the previous session, isolation versus insulation. Yes. And the point you're making, I think, Andreas, you made this point as well, is that global heating doesn't have boundaries.
Exactly.
We're all in this together. There were specific questions for you, Marcus, around moribund payments from Tembiso.
Yes, I don't remember talking about coal-fired power plants. I remember talking about cars, internal combustion engine cars.
Sorry, I'll remind you. You did speak about it actually, and you talked about perverse incentives and subsidies and various other things. But he remembers well, and so do I. Thank you. No, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the one part of my advice is be careful not to end up with all the old second-hand internal combustion cars, but go and invest in electric mobility. There is a recent study by the think tank Agora Transport in Berlin, looking at the cost of electric vehicles and the penetration of electric vehicles and the prospect for them in various regions of Africa. And it basically shows that as the cost of electric vehicles is coming down, you can avoid importing into the continent a lot of the old and wasteful internal combustion car engines. And I note that Morocco is investing in the production of electric vehicle batteries as well. It has become the export of Moroccan export number one above phosphates is now cars being exported from here. So it's moving in the right direction. And I repeat my advice that I did last year, and that is, in addition to rolling out renewables, one thing we must do is do away with all the, in the jargon, it's a proper term in the jargon, perverse subsidies that still exist in order to promote the extraction, the processing, the transport, and the use of fossil fuels. There is nothing more stupid than spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year on subsidizing an energy form that we don't want anymore. Instead, put that money elsewhere. And I will say that electrification with wind, solar, also geothermal and other technologies, including the storage that you need to build up, whether that's is battery storage or something else, including the smart grid, all of that included. Building that new is cheaper than maintaining the old fossil energy system. So we're actually saving money economically by shifting from one type of energy to another one. It's just that so many people don't understand it. There's a path dependency in our brains that we need to overcome.
No, thank you. Edward,
China
yes,
one.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah. No, I agree with Andrea that this is a global issue. In economics, we call it a public good. So we should all be pulling this, this in the same direction, but we're not. But considering that not only we don't have a world government, we don't even have now, we have a decaying international, order. We have multilateralism is very, very weak. Fragmentation, geopolitical shifts. So don't, it's no use, wishing the impossible. I think the title says it all. One goal, various journeys. And everybody has to move his own journey. I mean, of course, we could encourage cooperation, try to mend the international order. As Andreas hinted, we could find, a group of countries with somebody who doesn't want to join, so be it. But we move. So this is the way to go. Various journeys, everybody has his own journeys, and the central bank has its own, according to one's resource abilities. Again, I'm not discouraging cooperation, definitely not. But we have to be realistic, and the situation is not pretty in terms of cooperation, multilateralism, international order, you name it. It's a very sad situation at the moment.
And yet there's still hope, as Andreas pointed out, in terms of people ignoring this overbearing individual and moving on with what needs to be done.
Well, my name is Ana Palacios, I was a speaker. I will jump on what Dedever said, Professor Dedever. Okay, electricity is fantastic, but let's not forget that part of the economy is very difficult to electrify, and there is the issue of green hydrogen. We are designing corridors, big corridors in the European Union for the moment where we have to go from molecule to clean molecule. And this will happen. And I'm for electricity. You mentioned my sister commissioner. She worked on that. But we cannot just bet on one technology. We have to decarbonize. Why not clean fossil fuels? There are. Well, at least right now, there are even considered in the European Union for planes and for boats. I think that we have to forget about the ideology. We have to decarbonize, and this is it. my comment here on green hydrogen is that Africa is the source. Of course, we Europeans, we have to do it because these are our autochthon renewables here. And Morocco has a potential of green hydrogen, and of course, as they are the producers of fertilizers, they have the off-taker, the first off-taker. But why don't we design this connection across the Strait of Gibraltar, which for the moment, our big corridors stop there? And you have said it, several of you, this is a matter of cooperation. We are in it together. Let's go for it in a de-ideologized way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Saeed El-Hashimi from Morocco. I just want to be a bit provocative about the COPs. Do we still need them? I had the occasion to go there in my former capacity as a WTO official, but getting 40,000 people there, and the last one we saw, there's a big tide of skepticism, let's put it mildly, between one guy, I don't have to mention his name, asking drill, baby, drill, and then there's a wide stream, forceful voices that are no longer talking about energy transition, but energy addition. How do we, I mean, the panel we have here is quite coherent, okay. But how do you address skepticism
Thank you.
To move forward?
Thank you very much. And then we've got a question on this side.
Oui, merci, Professor Baumar.
Yes, thank you, Professor Baumar. I'd like to tell you about vectorial energy. It's been invented by African researchers, and I believe that this is one of the solutions to our energetic dependency that could stem from the continent itself. Now, should it be simplified because it's 30 times cheaper than any other type of energy? It's credible, it's proven, and there are lots of foreign powers interested in this revolutionary energy using vectorial energies adosed or added to AI for an available and relevant source of energy. Thank you.
I have to say I missed that. Please pass the... yes, sir.
May I? Okay. First, I'm a geophysicist, okay? So it is clear for me that the decarbonization is absolutely needed on the short term. Nevertheless, to be able to decarbonize, we need a decarbonization plan. And it will have different contributions on the short term. And never forget what happened in China, because I'm still of the time when China was criticized for coal use, and finally they are showing they have a plan. They have an idea what are their objectives. For Africa is clearly more complex. Most of the countries I know, it's even difficult to have electricity every day, everywhere. So how can we imagine that on the short term we can have an efficient distribution network that is difficult to organize even in European countries that think they are rich? So it's a huge challenge, it is needed, but we must have a plan that will not diminish the well-being of people.
Thank you. Do we still need COP, the provocation? And I'll throw that to, actually, Michelle, I think you're best for that. Please.
I believe that we are to refocus the debate because the global name of the game is to be understood. 55 countries in the world today have a carbon tariff. So it's a rule that enables them to either tax produced CO2 or to have carbon markets. And this was invented 20 years ago. Europe invented the first carbon market in 2003 and 2004. So let us give value to what we do not want to encourage, namely CO2 emissions. Once we have established that rule and it's shared, we need to work regionally. The carbon markets could be a global market in fine, but practically speaking, we have to start working with countries close to one another and start with these momenta, and it could be African countries working together. There's no problem about that. And then we can raise the question of what type of energy within these groups of countries we want to develop in order to serve our objectives. But we have to start from the economic sphere, from the financial incentives, and not from the other side. Otherwise, there will be some energy against energy battles, hydrogen against classic type of power. So we have to have a shared economic rule. COP30 is needed and says things about the carbon markets. France and Brazil made a proposal with regard to these carbon markets, but unfortunately they were not kept in the conclusions. But the COP is putting that subject on the table. It could not be the global solution, but it's a key for tomorrow.
Of the sorts of regional and cross-border cooperation that we need. Thank you. There was a question, and sir, I didn't quite understand your input on energy in Africa, but Sergio, please go ahead.
I just want a couple of things just to go over the China issue and the production in China. I think it's interesting to go back a little bit to history. The solar cell was developed in the 1960s in the US by NASA because they wanted to use it to generate electricity in their vehicles. And it was in the 1980s when Professor Martin Green in Australia and the University of New South Wales developed what is called the PERC cell, which is the cell that is most widely used in the world. About 50% of the cells come from that technology. But his students were Chinese. So they eventually took that technology and implemented it in China. That's why China became the largest producer of solar cells. Their efficiency is about 22%. There are new cells that are about double in terms of their efficiency. So is the market of solar cells controlled by PERC and the Chinese? Not much longer. So I think that if you make a business proposition, again, this has to do a cost-effective type of technology, then there will be new solar cells that can be produced elsewhere, not only in China, unless China starts producing more efficient solar cells. But I think this is a paradigm that could change any time because of the technology being developed. But the other comment that I wanted to make is that we are focusing, and we typically do that a lot, on the supply, and we seldom talk about the demand. And let's talk about, for example, the three sectors that are relevant for the decarbonization of economy. First one is the building or the built environment. 1/3 of the CO2 that is produced by buildings, and 1/3 of the energy that is consumed by buildings. So one way that we can decarbonize the economy is to be more efficient in the way we build our buildings, the way we manage, the way we operate our buildings, and the way that we deconstruct our building, not demolish. We deconstruct our buildings so that we can reuse the buildings. We cannot just demolish the building and rebuild in the same place. We ought to use what we have as a building, rehabilitate, retrofit the building, and try to not use as much carbon embodied as we already have. If you just make the numbers of the carbon that is embodied, because there is concrete here and steel there and aluminum, and all this has consumed tremendous amount of energy. There is a lot of carbon embodied in the buildings. So we need to not increase that footprint anymore. 7% or to 8% of the CO2 emitted comes from the steel industry. 7% comes from the cement industry. Half of those comes from China, because China is the largest producer of steel, cement, and concrete in the world. So one way to actually reduce and decarbonize the economy is to make systems more efficient. How can we produce steel bars, steel ingots, whatever, in a more efficient way? In Sweden, for example, they have been developing new technologies in which you have been using other types of sources of energy to actually reduce the carbon footprint. So going back to the green carbon, green hydrogen, is only produced, is only amounts for 2% of all the hydrogen that is produced in the world. So how can we increase that? Well, on the one hand, we need to reduce the cost on transportation and storage, and that has to do a lot of in terms of investments in technology. And of course, it would be lovely to have a corridor in this, But unless it is a business proposition that makes sense, there is no way that you can develop a corridor. It's just not, the idea is great, but it has to make a business case, can be sense of as a business case in order to actually increase. But it's just a matter of a scale that we need to start growing the green hydrogen technology that eventually will become kind of a corridor as you were mentioning. And that's why it's so relevant, the COP, in the sense that at least we talk about several topics, we talk about similar technologies, and we can find ways to actually develop technologies in a much faster way and implement it in a much faster way. And probably that would be a good way to change the pessimistic view to an optimistic view.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, go ahead.
Answer, if I may, this skepticism shown at COP and whether we should have them anymore. It's a very difficult to reply to that. But at the same time, with our feet on the ground, we're seeing more regionalization. In other words, we're seeing a world where it will go around sort of whoever is around, with influence of the United States or China on the other hand. Europe may be, because sometimes Europe is under the influence of the US, but it could, at least on certain issues, be on its own. Africa can decide its own future. So just because of this trend, which is not good to see, should one accelerate it by sort of doing away with COP? I don't think it would be very presumptuous to do that. Maybe the agenda could be pruned, but not to stop something which exists already. But it's sad to see this regionalization increasing, and then that also then the principle of competitiveness comes in, and that will be then a race to the bottom, because already the EU is pruning, say, regulations of all sorts in finance and the environment and so on, because it can see the competitiveness gain of the United States by removing sort of deregulating across the board.
Okay, I can take a final round of questions before we close.
Oh, we're fine.
Yes.
Yeah, we're
Njoya? Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Njoya Tekum from UNDP in Senegal. I think my question builds a little bit on the conversation around the carbon market. We know that Africa contributes less than 4% to global emission, which means for us, our credits are mostly coming from non-additionals. They're coming from prevention or avoidance mitigation measures. But in the global financial market, the global carbon financial market, these are frowned upon. These are not compensated properly. I think the preference is for industrial offsets. And my question is, and this of course comes from the Paris Accord. My question is, did we get it wrong in the way we structured the carbon market? Because if you have a continent that is producing a lot of preventive carbon credit mitigation into the market but not compensated for it, what incentive would these countries have to continue to be part of this global carbon conversation?
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Fonte Akum of the Institute for Security Studies. There's a lot of excitement around the advancement of artificial intelligence, which is really carbon intensive. How do we square the circles around artificial intelligence and leapfrogging while decarbonizing?
Thank you. We can take one more question. Yes, please. Thank you. Sir?
Thank you very much, Peter Hefle, Policy Director of the Martin Center. I would like to go back to the transatlantic relations. Let's assume there's another America behind Trump, which is very, as you alluded to, is still engaged. How can we tap into those forces? Andreas, what would you see as promising approaches, for example, from the European Union, which is still considering itself as a flag holder in this endeavor? Thank you.
Thank you. So, did we get the carbon markets wrong? Michelle?
The banker.
Ma réponse spontanée.
My spontaneous answer as to the excellent question about the adaptation of the carbon markets in Africa is that one never mixes two types of actions that are mentioned in the COPs. In the COPs, they talk about funding adaptation measures, mitigation, and we've mentioned 10 years ago 100 billion funds to adapt economies to decarbonization. They're talking about 120 billion per annum of dollars by 2035 to favor adaptation. Part of that amount could be provided to articulate and to encourage carbon markets and enable these and for the economies that still haven't developed any carbon markets to put them in place to simulate them. So I think it's a proposal that is well worth analyzing, and I often mention it to my students in Paris. I think we have to stop working in silos with regard to these subjects. We talk about helping people and countries in the development world, but we never mix it with the carbon market. But why not?
Do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we know, I mean, the technology exists, you know, the know-how exists. It's just, you know, it's a question of sovereignties, countries' interests, self-interest, or whatever it is, which holds these back. It's not that we don't know how to do it. I mean, it's, you know, we have all the knowledge about it, and it all boils down to where's the will, you know? What's holding us back? Very big question.
Edward, I'm going to push you, just because you work with money. You're a central bank governor.
Mm-hmm.
And the question was, Africa is not being properly compensated. Did we structure the carbon markets wrong? Michel has given us some sort of idea about, you know, mixed things and silos and collaboration. I think he's been careful in his response. And so now I'm coming to you. Was this by design or by default?
Look, moving sideways, this disappointment about globalization and multilateralism was because it was very efficient, but then the gains and the benefits from them were not distributed fairly and equally. And people were disappointed and very angry. And that's what the movement to the right. So unless people see that the benefit is distributed fairly, they will not support it. They, you know, and it's behind all this political movement to the right, the protest, you name it. So it's not a question of a person or a president with a name. It's much more behind it. And you can apply that to the absence of markets and other initiatives which somehow have not gained ground.
If I were to push back, we'd start another panel, so I'll hold off. Andreas, two questions, I think, which were, respond to any question, actually. The question about the structure of carbon markets, but also artificial intelligence being at odds with decarbonisation.
Yeah. First of all, actually, Ana Palacios left the room, but I think it is important to recall that at the origin of hydrogen is renewable electricity. Green hydrogen is made from renewable electricity. So what's the business case for converting valuable electrons into heavy to transport, difficult to control protons and then having hydrogen? Only if you have a plan what you want to do with the hydrogen afterwards that adds value. And you cannot add value by keeping it as hydrogen. You either produce synthetic fuels from it, which you can then use, for example, in aeroplanes where there are few alternatives. You can produce ammonia, which is a drop-in substitute as a bunker fuel for the shipping industry. So use Morocco's, Namibia's proximity to shipping lanes in order to capture the market for marine fuels. You can produce all sorts of things, but do not ship out the hydrogen because it's just too expensive to do. It's always cheaper, safer to ship out the electrons. So make the electricity connections from Morocco to Iberia or bypass Iberia and France, which is the problem going into Ireland and whatever. Said, it is the economics. At the moment, electrification is the cheapest option, it's the fastest option, it's the most versatile option we have at the moment. We have heard about the increasing efficiency of solar panels. The cost regression of solar panels is 24-25% each time the aggregate output doubles. That is in less than a year, we have a decline by 24%, and it's predicted to continue like that for at least 5 to 7 years. After that, the forecasts get a little bit hazy. It's just the economics is going to drive the expansion of electricity to the detriment of everything else. And this is not about adding something, renewable energy, to the existing fossil energy, because we need to phase out the fossil energy in order to save the planet from overheating. Carbon markets have been badly designed. That is not a fault that the Africans made, that is a fault that the global community made. There is a bias for technical solutions, for capital-intensive solutions, with technologies that can be appropriated, that can be patented. We have not designed good carbon markets for systems that rely on natural systems, afforestation, reforestation, ecosystem carbons. All of that has not been done because there isn't the financial interest behind it. We've been misdirected by the lobbyists of that area. AI being carbon intensive, that's the last question you wanted me to address. No, AI is not carbon intensive. That is a rubbish argument. I'm sorry to put it to you. It is energy intensive. It is carbon intensive only if you are stupid enough to burn coal for it. Or gas, because let's not forget, methane gas, with the leakiness of the gas system, methane gas is actually more dangerous as a greenhouse gas than coal is. The total global overheating contribution of natural gas, as you call it in English, fossil methane gas, is worse than coal. And I think we need to make sure that as we expand our use of artificial intelligence, and therefore the server centers that have to do all the calculations in the background, they need to be powered by renewable energy. They need to be cooled by the best means possible. They can be underwater in the sea. They're doing that in the Baltic Sea, for example. They can do that by going into the mountains where the air is thinner, where the temperature is cooler. You save 4 times as much energy by avoiding the cooling as you do in driving the server systems themselves. So I think it's very important. Electrification will solve your AI problem. And the rest of the problem will be solved by the AI bubble bursting at some point, and then the whole hope getting a little bit smaller, because nobody at the moment will want to pay the price that is necessary in order to recover the investment that is being made in that industry at the moment. This is economically unsustainable, and it's a question of who will lose when the bubble bursts, but it will burst sooner or later.
Fonte, I wonder whether your question also had to do with the amounts of water required for AI. Can we have the microphone?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rita Mahfoudi from Morocco. In the same, to continue this question, when we talk about, can we talk about green transition, etc.? So it's going from avoiding fossil to go to renewable energy, source of energy. But when we think about the life cycle of the product, we're talking about solar panels that are going to be cheaper. It's great when you see it as a competitiveness of economy, industrials, etc. But what about the impact of this on what you call the green planet Earth, the water used? Also for batteries, we see the mining, the impact of water. Are we not doing the same mistake and displacing the problem in other places of the planet Earth to talk about the transition, the green transition?
Andreas.
I need to answer to that question with a comparison. If you take the total mass of stuff that we need in order to build the new energy system, that is the renewable energy, it is the smart grid, it's the storage, and the electrical components in between. The total amount of stuff that we need to do that until 2040 is 1/500th, 1 divided by 500th of the amount of stuff we need to move every year. every year, not for the whole period, but every year, just to sustain our fossil energy system. So whenever we talk about sort of the dependency on rare earths and vulnerabilities, let's not forget this is stuff that you extract from the earth, you can store very easily. It's a few container full that you need to bring in order to build durable equipment which you can use in the case of wind turbines 20, 25 years. In the case of solar panels, they can practically live forever, let's say 50, 60 years. Batteries, at the moment, we see that batteries don't actually age with the new technologies. They do not lose their storage capacity, so theoretically they can live forever. But if they die, we can recover the materials within it. We do not have the same dependency that we have on the continuous supply, 500 times as much, multiplied by 15 between now and 2040. This new energy industry is going to be so much smaller, so much lighter, and therefore the environmental damage, water use, but also energy consumption in building it is so much smaller than just maintaining the fossil energy system as it is at the moment. And I cannot leave this panel without saying that there is no energy economic rationale for nuclear power.
It's your position.
Look,
it's your position.
No. Look, we're out of time. And so what I'd like you to do very quickly is to take out your phones, go to the word cloud, and tell me what you think, given what you've heard, about where the next real breakthrough in global climate coordination will come from. Alliances. Wonderful. Anything else? Where will the next real breakthrough in global climate coordination come from? China.
War. South.
Global South. Okay. China.
We're missing Trump.
Yeah. And I think that has to do with you. So look,
and Mexico,
gentlemen, it sounds like we all got a lot from your insights. And so Sergio, Michel, Andreas, Edward, thank you very much for your time.
Welcome.
You've been most amazing. Thank you.
And thank you, Uduak, for guiding us
well done.
through this.
Lovely.
Panelists were asked to remain on stage for a group photo.